Please share it.
Okay, I will. Okay. Inna alhamdulillah, wa salat, wa salam ala wa rasulullah. I want to welcome everybody back again for part 3 of this special series that we're doing with Brother Yusef that everyone is ranting about. And you need to, because what he's doing is breaking down the history of Palestine, which is not something that you're going to get in plain, simple English from everyone. And the shorts are going viral. I've received many comments from you guys. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Brother Yusef. And also we have Dr. Ibrahim Doramali here too, who will join a little later with his commentary as well. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Brother Yusef. Go ahead.
Hey, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters. It's good to be back. Part 3 of this ever tragic series, if you will. For those of you who missed parts 1 and 2, I do recommend. Now, each one, I do give a recap in the beginning where you will be able to kind of get some of the stuff that you may have missed. But to get all the details, as we are really breaking this down year by year, step by step. Previous 2 parts took us from the 1880s all the way up until we last left off in 1947. Period, pretty much. We are going to be focusing the entirety of part 3 on 1947 to the foundation of Israel, May 14, 1948. So we talked about the League of Nations opening in part 1, Article 22. What did Article 22 guarantee? It was an erasure of the colonial system. We talked about the colonialism was being phased out. And what was happening was that newly conquered nations would be given sovereignty. Article 22 laid that out. We talked about Palestine being designated a Class A mandate, meaning that it was a rich civilization full of history, language, and culture. It was not the third world. They needed very limited support, and the goal was to get them on their feet. We looked at what was going on behind the scenes. We looked at the Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1915, 1916. We looked at the infamous Balfour Declaration of 1917. We saw how all that intertwined Palestine's destiny without the people even being aware of it. We went into the 1920s and talked about immigration as a weapon. The big topic at the time became Jewish immigration. We saw populations explode. We saw immediately racist policies, in the land. We saw numerous Arab rebellions, which we covered in part 2. And we saw the infamous white paper for the Zionists, which was an attempt by the British government to try to make wrongs right and try to balance, things out a little bit. We saw different solutions being pushed. And ultimately, we saw support for a global Jewish state being brought to the international community. We talked about how Jews were reluctant to move. They were happy in their homelands. We demonstrated that, statistically speaking. We showed in published statements of the Zionists that the goal was to get European sympathy and European money and Western money. Later on, America obviously would come into this tragic story. And we saw how they did that. We saw how the narrative of World War II was all too convenient for them, not by accident, not by coincidence. It gave them everything that they wanted. It changed the global perspective. Now, basically, for the first time, you had all the states united in their destination of having a Jewish homeland. So we left off with the mandate system was coming to an end. Britain was going to relinquish control. They had turned it over to the United Nations. In this key episode, I want you to look at some, couple key points that I documented here. I want everyone to notice how they operate, how collectivized they are. These people function like a machine across what would perceive to be interconnected areas, interconnected disciplines, interconnected societies. They focus wholly on one holistic goal, and they work as a machine. The Muslims can learn valuable lessons from watching how the Zionists pulled this hoax off. Because we Muslims are all about our selfish interests. We're all about ourselves. We'll cut our brothers' throats, as Sister Layla was talking about in our little chat that we had before we went live here. We don't have such unity, and you can see the results. So I want everybody to notice, again, that core message. We've already seen it in the previous 47 years that we have covered. We're going to see it even more here today. You're going to hear, again, the talks of Little Israel. In fact, I watched what to say the word scholarly in this presentation would be disgusting, but I saw a Christian group of people, one a former Arab who converted to Christianity from Islam from Morocco, and a notorious Christian apologist had done an hour-long, session on their YouTube channel talking about the history of Palestine. And I mean, it was like a fifth grader had wrote this, or a third grader. I mean, the history was so wrong, so many inaccuracies, not even half truths, not even quarter truths, not even tenth truths being told. But the narrative you always hear, which to kind of summarize that, was little Israel. They're such an underdog. They're going up against all these massive Arab populations. Well, we're going to see today how little Israel really was when it came to funding, when it came to espionage, when it came to terrorism, when it came to infrastructure, and when it came to support from the industrialized nations of the world. Were they really the underdog, or were they predetermined to win this thing all along? I wish that we had Christians watching. I really would like them to watch these presentations in the future, inshallah, and just simply ask, where are you getting your narrative from? Have you ever investigated your narrative? When you're pro-Israel, why are you pro-Israel? What has this community ever done for you? Besides bring pornography to the mainstream here in this country, besides opening up your borders, besides extracting billions of your taxpayer dollars every year, what has this community that you so blindly follow done for you? I want them to ask that question if we do have any Christian viewers. So now we set the stage for 1947. I call this basically an era of war and land grabs, as we are going to be seeing a lot is going to change just within a matter of a year. So we left off, as I mentioned in the opening, with the British government taking the decision to put the hands of the Palestinian people, the destiny of Palestine, into the hands of the United Nations in February of 1947. This is the newly formed United Nations as a response to World War II, much like you had the League of Nations was formed as a response to World War I. So in April 28th of 1947, the United Nations would elect Oswaldo Aranha of Brazil as its first president. Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Syria would lead Arab delegations. The request in light of the League of Nations, they demanded, again, bringing back the Class A mandate. What happened to this? We were promised we are a Class A mandate here. Why are we not being treated as such? Why is our land being negotiated in boardrooms all over the world, in every country but the one in which is being disputed? Very legitimate claims here made, by the Arab delegations. The Zionist case would be pushed the hardest by Poland. If anyone's familiar with the history there, no mystery as to why. I mean, heavy Zionist presence in the Eastern Bloc, since the majority of the immigrants were from Eastern European countries. And again, this kind of goes against the narrative, doesn't it? Because we're hearing that they're fleeing Germany because of how much persecution they supposedly endure. We hear all the time, 6 million, that 6 million perished in just a very short period of time in questionable circumstances. But yet they're admitting, in these meetings here, that the majority of their immigrants are coming from Eastern Europe. Now granted, Poland was under Nazi occupation. Most of the supposed death camps were liberated by the Zionist-controlled Bolshevik army. No accident there, obviously. So special committee would be appointed to hear the arguments from both sides. It would comprise of 11 members, consisting of the permanent members of the Security Council. An Arab state and 5 other states were chosen to ensure representation of all regions. The committee would hear British, Arab, and Jewish representatives all telling their version or tale of this. And they wanted to have the widest possible spectrum of information, really to make, what they felt was fair recommendations on how to move forward in this very, dire situation. The central question would be the problem of the Jewish refugees in Europe. So again, this was the narrative shift. They gained this in World War II. They did not have it before, because before it was about their historical ties to the land. That's the argument that they were using. Now, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, well, you have all these homeless Jews in Europe from war. Well, the Allies firebombed Dresden, burned the entire city to the ground, massacred untold numbers of German people. But we didn't hear basically that we got to go carve up land somewhere else for all these displaced German people, or displaced, war affected everyone basically throughout these Nazi-controlled territories. So this again was very convenient for them how this all transpired, because now the discussion has again switched to this. The plight of these homeless Jews was necessitated, an action, and pressure was immediately put on the member states to find a place for them to go either permanently or temporarily. The Syrian delegation, they had something very key here to say. The question of Palestine is altogether independent and separate from the question of persecuted persons of Europe. The Arabs of Palestine are not responsible in any way for the persecution of the Jews in Europe. This has been echoed by the Arab world ever since. If you want to use this argument, it's not us that did this. Why are we being the ones that are having our door kicked in and being told that now this land belongs to someone else and you can't work it, you can never own it again, and you're being completely displaced, but then you're being told, well, don't worry, you're being displaced for the right reasons, because all of these homeless Jews there don't have nowhere to go. And the Syrian delegation said what everybody at the time was thinking, who was independent and unbiased. How is it our problem? You're just going to open up our land and bring refugees in for the problem of an entirely different continent. The Jewish delegation would insist that the two questions were linked, of having the Zionist homeland and the Jewish refugees. And this was something, obviously, they would continue to push that must move forward. The members of the committee will ask themselves, I'm sure, while shiploads of helpless Jewish refugees, men, women, and children who have been through all the hells of Nazi Europe, are being driven away from the shores of a Jewish national home, the Jewish national home. So already they're using that language before it's even been determined by the pen. The Jewish national home by mandatory government, talking about the British here, which assumed as its prime obligation the task of facilitating Jewish immigration into the country. So right here, the Jewish delegation is taking a shot at Britain. They're saying, look, you promised us this. Now you're trying to act a little bit, wishy-washy, don't want to go either way. What are you doing here? You're the ones that gave us the declaration. You need to fulfill your obligations. If it is granted that the Jewish people are in Palestine as of right, then all the implications and choralities of that premise must be accepted. The foremost is that Jews must be allowed to resettle in Palestine in unlimited numbers, provided only they do not displace or worsen the lot of the existing inhabitants who are there also as of right. If that basic premise is not granted, then there is little to discuss. So here again, as I told you, what they tell you on Monday is not what they're going to tell you on Friday. Right now, they still care. They're telling you, unlimited immigration. You can't have unlimited immigration when there's no unlimited land. Obviously, if you continue to bring in unlimited numbers of people, somebody at some point in time is going to be pushed away. I wish we could make our politicians in this country understand that question as well, because the American people and most of Europe and most of the civilized world now are dealing with these questions of immigration being weaponized against the people. The United Nations would hold a special committee on Palestinian rights the following month in June of 1947. This would take place in New York. Now, the Arab Higher Committee would not attend in protest, and they would issue only a statement, because they're sitting here saying, again, it's like the equivalent if I'm in my house and all of a sudden the police come and they knock on my door and they say, oh, you've got an extra guest room in there. This person's going to move into that room temporarily. Don't worry, it'll be settled. Then after time, I'm told that he has the same right to exist in my house as I do. I mean, this is kind of, again, the Arab delegates, like the nerve of you people to try to negotiate what's already ours, that was promised to us under international law. So they desire to convey to the United Nations that after thoroughly studying the deliberations and circumstances under which the Palestine Fact-Finding Committee was formed and the discussions leading to terms of reference, they resolved that Palestine Arabs would abstain from collaboration, desist from appearing before said committee for the following main reasons. Firstly, the United Nations refusal to adopt natural courses of inserting termination mandate and declaration of independence and agenda special United Nations sessions in the terms of reference. So they're saying again here, you are not acknowledging past mandates. You're not acknowledging the independence that was promised for us at the end of the mandate system. We never agreed to any of this. This was never laid out in international law. You would see here again, one second. This was referring to the immigration. One second. Of course, yes, the part about detaching Jewish rural refugees from Palestine problem. Thirdly, replacing interest of Palestine inhabitants by insertion of world religious interest, although these are not subject to contention. Furthermore, Palestinian Arabs' natural rights are self-evident and cannot continue to be subject to investigation, but deserve to be recognized on the basis of principle. So he's saying again, why are our rights being negotiated here? What is this? Why are we having to discuss unlimited immigration? Why are we having to discuss our Class A mandate status? So for them boycotting, people will say in history, if you listen to the Zio-controlled media, the Arabs brought this on themselves. They won't come to the table. They didn't show up. Well, why should they? Their case was clear from the beginning. This is our land. It was our land before. It was promised internationally to be our land. The Jewish committee, however, would fully cooperate and attend the special session and state to the delegation, we are a small, weak, defenseless people, and we know that there can be no security for us, neither as individuals nor as a people, neither in the diaspora nor in our homeland. Even after we become an independent nation, our own state, as long as the whole human family is united in peace and goodwill. So he's basically saying here again that line, we are a small, weak, defenseless people. They always play that narrative. We're going to see later how small and weak they are when we start talking about funding and weaponry and infrastructure money that they were receiving. But again, pleading the victim card. Everywhere we go, we're persecuted, including in our own homeland. And they continue, a great people in the entire civilized world will recognize our rights to reconstitute a national home here. And now the same government that was charged with that sacred trust of promoting the Jewish national home has put us in a territorial ghetto. So this is a shot at the British. Can you imagine the nerve of these people? You know, they had been given at this point everything. The British had secured a territory in war. The Zionists did not fight for that territory. Their sons and daughters did not sacrifice in World War I for this territory. They are now demanding again that the British government do more when they had already done so much. In fact, these are the same people that we talked about in part 2 that bombed the King David Hotel intentionally to harm the British military infrastructure as well as British intelligence. These are the same people as we're going to look at further with sniper attacks on British police. And they're sitting here saying these things. Ben Gurion would famously state, we stand by the attitude we took last year, that we will be ready to consider the question of a Jewish state in an adequate area, adequate being key word there, of Palestine, and that we are entitled to Palestine as a whole. This was said in 1947. This rings eerily true when you look at the current events of today. They're telling you, as I mentioned in part 2, they're calling their shots as a whole, right there in his statement. He also said the United Nations decision in favor of Zionist aims provoked violent protests from the Palestinian Arabs. Here's a quote, we will take care of ourselves. So here you have a lot of bold statements coming out of the future Prime Minister of Israel. Dr. Chaim Weizmann back in the picture. He was featured prominently in part 1 and 2. He would defend the idea of the partition plan, agreeing the people could never live side by side. So you have Weizmann saying one thing, yes, we're fine with a partition, but then you have Ben Gurion over here saying, we're entitled to Palestine as a whole. The British delegation issued statements condemning the Zionist attitudes toward Britain and the help, resources, and support they had provided to ensure the Jewish homeland. The British were very offended, obviously by these statements. And the only agreement that was made initially by the committee was to terminate the mandate. That is what we kind of talked about the tail end of part 2. The two-state solution was now going further, and Jerusalem would be deemed an international city, as we're going to see how all of that, of course, over the next few years would, of course, not happen either. So in 1947, September, you would have what they called the Ad Hoc Committee, which was the second session of the United Nations General Assembly. The majority proposal would be, part 1, partition and independence, which means that Palestine with its present borders following a transitional period of 2 years from 1st September 1947 shall be constituted into an independent Arab state, an independent Jewish state, and the city of Jerusalem. So this was the partition and independence coming from the ad hoc committee. Independence shall be granted to each state upon its request only after it has adopted a constitution, has made the United Nations a declaration containing certain guarantees, and has signed a treaty creating an economic union of Palestine and establishing a system of collaboration between the two states and the city of Jerusalem. So you're looking for a cooperative agreement here, peace treaties, coexistence, living side by side. Obviously, the Arabs were still, of course, not thrilled with this, but you look at this here now, compared to what's going to unfold, it's night and day. Citizenship designations were determined by the committee. Palestinian citizens, as well as Arabs and Jews, who not holding Palestinian citizenship reside in Palestine, shall, upon recognition of independence, become citizens of the state which they are residents. And I'm going to get into the breakdown here in a second of the exact numbers of how that residency would work. And of course, as I mentioned, the final part of this was an economic union, the treaty between the two states, which would have to be ratified. So part of that population distribution was the Jewish state would receive 498,000 total Jews. Arabs and others would comprise 407,000 for a total of 905,000. The Arab state would consist of 10,000 Jews, 725,000 Arabs, and a total of 735,000 people. The city of Jerusalem would be balanced as 100,000 Jews, 105,000 Arabs and others for a total of 205,000. So these were all based on population projections and numbers of how this partition, was going to be, divided between the factions. In addition, there would also be recognized in the Jewish state about 9,000 of what they called nomadic Arab Bedouins, people really that just roam. It's the term for nomad, Bedouin in the Arabic language, and they would be assigned basically to the Jewish state. Another 90,000 of them would be included as well. So then you had, of course, the minority proposal, which was the independent state of Palestine. The peoples of Palestine were recognized to be entitled to their rights and of independence, and an independent federal state of Palestine shall be created following a transitional period not exceeding 3 years. The independent state of Palestine shall comprise an Arab state and a Jewish state. So they were kind of putting them under one umbrella with two separate. And during the transitional period, a consultant committee shall be assembled, elected by the population, of Palestine, and shall formulate the constitution of the independent federal state of Palestine. And then, of course, the attainment of independence by this state of Palestine shall be declared by the General Assembly of the United Nations only as soon as the authority administrating the territory shall have certified the General Assembly that no Constituent Assembly referred to in the precedent paragraph has adopted a constitution. So to make that legalese back to where we were before, that they would have to adopt the constitution and certain framework. At that point, as we mentioned before, they would then be recognized. There would be a single, under this minority plan, single nationality and citizenship that would be granted to Arabs, Jews, and Christians or others. So one passport, one nationality, would there. Jerusalem, which would stay very similar in this plan, would be basically under its local administration with two separate municipalities. One would be the Arab section, including part of the city within the walls, and the other areas, which were predominantly Jewish, would go to them. So you had, again, under this minority plan, you had a little bit of the same, but some slight differences. The Arab Higher Committee would outright reject, again, this plan. The Zionists would accept, but argue that not enough land would be given to them. We'll get to that here in a little bit. So they accepted for now because they knew where they were going. And they were fine with it. The Arabs were still dug in on their position. The British representative stated that his government was in general agreement with the unanimous principles that were approved by the committee and would accept the United Nations decision, but that it could not assume any further authority or responsibility. Britain was tired. They just got done being bombed relentlessly in World War II. They lost a lot of troops. They've been in Palestine now at this point for over 25 years. Going back, you can make even longer than that. And they just were basically saying, our hands are up. We are done. We're pulling out. We don't want to be involved in this anymore. Dr. Weitzman would quote in this to this committee, the mandate had envisioned a far more extensive territory for the Jewish state 8 times larger than that which was not proposed. And we, as we had stated before the special committee, it was not easy for the Jews to accept such a compromise. So he was saying, look, we were promised a lot more before. We're not happy, but we're going to go along with it. The idea of giving the Jews a minority status in the Arab state had been rejected by all the committee and by the impartial tribunals. It was not in order to become citizens of an Arab state that the Jews, on the strength of international promises, had made their home in Palestine. So Weitzman, again, continuing, this is not what they agreed to when deals were made with the British government for their own home state. Thus, only one solution remains as he finished, namely the partition and establishment of a Jewish state as it was proposed in the majority plan. So you're going to see the majority plan by far was more popular among the Zionists and the international community. So the two subcommittees then would form in 1947 to finally end this problem once and for all. They would meet for 4 weeks. Britain would withdraw all forces, this was in the agreement, by August 1st of 1948, at which time full control of these territories would now be given, basically with independence granted the conditions that we talked about prior, constitution and formed government by October of basically 1948. So that was the goal, to have full independence for these territories. We'll see as things unfold. It happened a lot sooner for one of them than that. So after numerous challenges had failed, the subcommittee, in substance, the amended special committee's majority recommendation, so they amended it, for the partition of Palestine was then voted on. So a little bit of amendments and changes on November 29th, 1947. This would be infamously known as UN Resolution 181. The vote would be 25 to 13. 17 countries abstained. Since 2/3 majority was not required in the ad hoc committee, the proposal of partition of Palestine was approved and recommended now for full adoption by the General Assembly. So whether the Arabs liked it or not, the plan was voted on. Resolution 181 would come. And here are just a list of some of the countries that were in favor of this plan: Australia, Bolivia, Brazil, Belarusian, Soviet Socialist Republic, Canada, Chile, Costa Rica, Czechoslovakia, Denmark, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Guatemala, Iceland, Nicaragua, Norway, Panama, Peru, Poland, Sweden, the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, South Africa, Soviet Socialist Republic Union, United States, obviously, Uruguay, and Venezuela. Against, you'd find Afghanistan, Cuba, Egypt, India, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Siam, Syria, Turkey, and Yemen. So you see unanimously the lines were drawn there. Other countries of note that abstained: Argentina, China, France, Greece, Netherlands, United Kingdom, and Paraguay and the Philippines were absent. Mexico would also abstain, and a couple of others. So whether the Arabs liked it or not, it was settled. It was done. Internationally, this goes against, again, Article 22 of the League of Nations, but so be it. They're making the rules as they move along. The Zionists welcomed the plan because it recognized the Jewish state that they fought so hard for, and the plan allocated slightly more than half of the Palestinian land west of Jordan to them. So the newcomers are going to get slightly more than half in this partition. This would call for the formation, also in Resolution 181, of a UN Palestine Special Commission, which was tasked with overseeing provisional councils of government for both the Jewish and Palestinian states by April 1st of 1948. And it would set the dates again for the mandate termination no later than August 1st of the same year. But the British announced later they would terminate the mandate much earlier than that. Their target would be in May. So now we enter to the kind of the climax of this presentation, and part 1, 2, and 3 here is we're in the first half. And that's when the biggest civil war of the conflict would escalate for the first time, known as the Palestinian Civil War. So once this announcement of Declaration 181 was announced, or Resolution 181, this was met with anger, hostility, throughout the Arab world, particularly of the peoples of Palestine, because they were now seeing, well, if you lived over there, you now were going to be under Jewish control in a Jewish state. The land was being partitioned and given away. Land that you had been on with your ancestors for thousands of years is now gone from you. So, of course, there was anger, there was resentment, there was feelings of abandonment, no representation, and all those type of emotions. And the announcement, of course, to the Jewish community was met with very fond ears. I mean, the Jewish community was thrilled that now basically they had, their own, land here. They were going to be able to build their own state. They were promised by the British behind closed doors. So it finally come to fruition. Counter protests would go on by the Arabs. It started off, mild, but it would just escalate rather rapidly. And it would start getting bad here. The first attack would be an attack on a Jewish bus, which killed 5 and wounded about 20 to 30 others. A few minutes later, you would have a second bus being ambushed. So you had 2 back-to-back attacks by the rebels of Palestine against the Jews. Now, you hear this, and if you stop right here, which a lot of historical articles would, you would think, oh, goodness, the Arabs are starting to kill innocent people here. You start hearing the echoes of Islamic terrorism, but did they act preemptively here, or did something else happen? Well, as usual, there's always more to the story. Just a couple days prior, the Zionists would make an attack which became known as the Shubaki family assassination, the Shubaki attack. This was the execution of 5 adult members of the Shubaki family, a well-off family. The reason given was the Zionists claimed that this family was serving as informants for the British police. This attack was carried out, going back to part 2, by our good old friends, the righteous Stern Gang, the same ones that assassinated British diplomats in Egypt, the same ones that were stealing arms from the British military, the same group that bombed the King David Hotel. So here they're carrying out executions of families because they're cooperating with the mandated government. I mean, this has got to be, it's sickening. And it's only going to get more sickening as we move on. So the British government was more biased, as we've demonstrated, toward the Zionist cause, but they were peacekeepers. They were there to stop the Zionist terrorism that was going on, because what these people do, you can see throughout history, we've covered it multiple times in this series, as well as others, is they poke you. They are trying to get a reaction so then they can turn the cameras on and they can say, look what they're doing. Look what they're doing. We have no choice. We have to defend ourselves. They either do that way, they provoke you, or they go and they dress like you and they pretend that they're you, and then they do the attack and blame it on you for the justification to do what they're doing. So they need to poke the bear, so to speak, get the Palestinians angry, get the people fired up so that when they attack, they could go to the international community and say, look, it's terrorism. We're defending ourselves. Same thing that we're seeing today. Exactly. Anytime we hear of any attack coming out of there, I always ask people, exercise caution, just wait. I'm sure enough, when you dig deep, you're going to find that no Palestinian had anything to do with it. Most of the time, it's something to this effect. So you have assassinations and you have responses. So now, of course, the Zionists would retaliate and things would start getting out of control rather quickly. So always when we hear, again, I can't emphasize this enough, Arab aggression, we always need to go deep and find the actual reasons. Now, I'm not saying by any means that all Arabs are innocent. No community has all angels. I mean, obviously, there's not a such thing. But when you look at a lot of these core attacks, we always find there was a provocation. There was a reason behind this. So you would have Irgun and Lehi. Lehi is also the official name of the Stern Gang. They would begin carrying out campaigns of pure terrorism on the Arab people. Again, like I said, they're just poking. They're just waiting for the reaction they want, and then they'll be able to do what they've always wanted to do, which is, again, as Ben Gurion said, I can never come back to it enough, entitled to the whole. So bombs would be placed, and where they placed the bombs? In military institutions? No, of course not. That's not these guys' style. They placed them in crowded markets, throwing bombs, in one case, multiple, into a crowd of Arab workers who were waiting to go to work in a refinery. These were not combatants. These were not aggressors. These were men queuing in line to go into a refinery to go to work. They threw multiple bombs at them. The bombing would kill 6, injure 42. They were attacking the infrastructure, bombs in markets, bombing roads, ambushes, you name it. It was going on. A lot of these would go on in areas where mixed communities live, particularly Jerusalem and Haifa. There would be exchanges of attacks going on routinely, riots. One attack would lead to another. One side would claim retaliation. And now something very interesting would happen in light of all this. Again, they had all this well thought out. Ben Gurion would introduce conscription for the first time, a policy still existing to this day, where every single Jewish man and woman would undergo military training. They already had the infrastructure well in place, I should say, to get this going. So what first domino that started to fall was that you had all this terror and fear and the climate of just like what we're seeing now, but not nearly as bad. 100,000 Palestinians would flee. This would be the first time we would see an exodus of people. Again, all going according to plan. 1,000 Palestinians, mostly from middle classes and upper classes who had no intention of fighting, did not want to be in the conflict. They would go to your surrounding Arab states. We still see evidences of a lot of these people today. There are Palestinians with Syrian travel documents. There are Palestinians with Lebanese travel documents and Jordanian and Egyptian. Some went to Saudi, got nationality, not many, but some did move there to work, and so on. So we're now seeing exoduses happen for the first time. Another one, you get 2 birds with 1 stone. You're grabbing the land. You're creating the reason. Next, you're grabbing the land. You're driving the people out of the land. So was this a fair fight? And I want to go back to the little Israel. We're going to go back to Weitzman's statement that they're a poor, pathetic people who's persecuted everywhere they go. They have no allies. They have no friends. All that narrative that we hear still to this day. Well, Golda Meir became a future prime minister. She would raise funds for Jewish sympathizers around the world. The budget would be $28 million. This is free money. $28 million for military arms and equipment for Zionism in the cause of the Zionist homeland. Now let's compare how much the Arabs got from the Arab High Committee. 2.25 million. 28 million, 2.25 million. It ain't over. It's going to get a lot worse as we progress in this. So again, little Israel, David and Goliath, the underdog, all the narrative the media still feeds us to this day. We can see right here from day one, this was not a fair fight. Because these numbers, as I'm going to mention later, do not take into consideration the significant amount of donations and assistance for military professionals and personnel that were coming in. They were getting paramilitary, mercenaries, all kinds of people were coming in also to help, giving military training, providing weapons and arms. We're going to get to a little bit more of how they got the arms in there. They already had a lot from what we talked about previously of hijacking and stealing arms from the British. They were about to get a lot more. So by January of this civil war, over 1,500 Arabs were killed, 400 Jews. So you're already seeing that this, again, is not a fair fight. We're seeing the casualty discrepancies almost basically, 4-1. Now, Syria would try to step up and flow in. Volunteers would come from Syria, some from surrounding Arab territories. Syria attempted to do a lot to help, actually, try to bring in arms from Czechoslovakia, but the Haganah, which is a Jewish paramilitary group, would intervene because there was a British embargo still as part of this agreement that was stopping the importing of arms. This whole thing is so deep we could have done 8 hours on it, to be honest, but there was an embargo there, and the Haganah, working with it, was able to stop these shipments coming in from Czechoslovakia, which would have been pipelined from Syria and flooded into the Arabs. But Joseph Stalin, however, would also import arms from Czechoslovakia directly in to the Israelis, and he would breach the embargo. So we see on one hand, the weapons were stopped. I'm sure no coincidence there. And on the other hand, we're seeing the weapons just got through the embargo and landed right into the hands they were intended to get to. The Arab Liberation Army was funded by the Arab League, only a budget of £1 million. This is at that particular moment in time, We talked about 2.25 million later would be declared. Initially, the funding was basically dwarfed by the Zionist funds. And of this first initial 1 million, none of it would arrive. So they pledged it, but they didn't actually even donate it. Our own nations, who were there against this, supposedly, against this partition plan, against all the violations, when it came to put their money where their mouth is, nothing happened. Only Syria truly would support the Arabs as best they could, both with men. The rest of them were AWOL, without any location, you know. Haganah, the Zionist military organization, would acquire more arms and funds. 129 million, or another number now. Golda Meir got fundraising, 28 million. Here we got 129 million US dollars would be raised from October of 1947. They were getting it before the war started. No coincidence there, I'm sure. And March of 1949, 60% of that 129 million would go to arms. Sound familiar? 129 million, if you break it down today's dollars, is still lower than what we're giving them now, but it's kind of comparable. So, I mean, from the moment that even before Israel was recognized as a state, I talked about this in part 2, how America got, you know, the Jewish influences there brought America to the table. And America became the new keeper, you know, if you will, of Israel. And right here in a 2-year period, the United States cuts a check for $129 million. How many families could we have fed here in the United States? How many lives could we have improved with that 129 million in 1947 money? I mean, that was a lot of money in those days. You could have bought homes for entire cities, you know, worth of people. I mean, my grandfather bought his home for $10,000 in 1960, just as an example of what they could have done for their nation with that money, instead sending it over there to fund this terrorist regime responsible for bombings. And they're going to have to answer, you know, obviously one day, you know, for this. So Haganah, again, would get through these arms. They also continued their offensive and launched Operation Balak, which was a smuggling operation to break the embargo and international law. So again, we see who's breaking international law again, still doing it to this day. How many resolutions have condemned these people over the last 70 years? It doesn't matter. They break it with impunity. And they would break this embargo, bringing thousands of rifles, hundreds of machine guns were delivered to Tel Aviv harbor. Haganah took the lead. The Stern Gang is the one out there doing the kind of guerrilla warfare, grassroots. And it would not be over. Top secret operation, Cast Thy Bread. They love coming up with nice sounding titles for something absolutely satanic and demonic. This operation would be launched and would foreshadow, unfortunately, many untold numbers of biological weapons being used by the Zionists. They basically, in this particular case, they poisoned the wells in the villages to prevent Palestinians, after conflicts have ended, from returning to the villages and settling. I mean, these people, I mean, when I tell people about them in my private life, I always say, you know, you have empathy. When you think about others, you think about them having empathy also. We are dealing with someone here who they don't have the ability to empathize. They don't see children crying or sick, and they don't feel a thing. It doesn't matter to them. You can't view your enemy as you view yourselves. You know, most normal people would say this is beyond what is considered acceptable in war. But for these people, no. And in fact, they give it a great title like Cast Thy Bread. And it's, again, it's just beyond sickening. I mean, they've used white phosphorus. They've used untold amounts of chemical weapons on the Palestinians in the history. I mean, you look at what they've done, you know, recently with the rapes and the killings and shooting children in the head and then doing videos on TikTok and laughing about it. We're dealing with people here, again, I just want everyone to understand that they don't have empathy. They don't have a care in the world for you. And they must be treated as such because they've demonstrated this time and time again. We can find no such cases. And I got a lot of this information from pro-Zionist sources in the internet, articles, encyclopedias, and such. They would certainly mention if the Arabs had done anything similar to this, but you don't find it. And all of this would end up as more and more, this whole war goes on. It's very in depth. There's lots of troop movements and pushbacks and positions. It's very long, almost an entire, maybe two-part video could be done just on the war. So I'm just kind of summarizing here. But as they would continue their advances, as they continued to arm the machine, they gained more and more land. And all this would culminate in the infamous declaration of the State of Israel on May 14th, 1948. So ahead of schedule, mission accomplished. The U.S. would unprecedentedly recognize this in 11 minutes. Didn't take long. The United States had already pledged 128 or 129 million, to them before. Why wouldn't they recognize them this fast? The second country to recognize the State of Israel was one that most people in history books probably wouldn't guess. Iran. Iran would actually recognize Israel number 2, followed by Guatemala, Iceland, Nicaragua, Romania, and then Uruguay. On the 17th, the Soviet Union would grant what they call de jure recognition, which means recognizing something, whether said practices are implemented in reality. Very interesting term they use. I'd never heard this one before. I gathered this in some of my recent research to kind of polish up on this. They're basically stating it doesn't really exist, but we're recognizing it as it does exist, even though legally speaking, it didn't have a technical right to exist. So now you're seeing the homeland is complete. You are seeing the declaration. Land was seized, during these offensives. The land is continuing to grow, but nothing like we would see as we progress into 1948. The table is set. The State of Israel has been declared. The Arab nations, what are you going to do? And we are going to see in part 4 coming up next week what would happen, how the Arabs would respond to this, how many troops would come to the battlefield, as you would have the 1948 war. And you would see unprecedented territorial grabs. As Ben Gurion said, he wants it all. They want the whole. And the agenda is well underway, and it's escalating to that point. And we will go there in part 4. We are going to look at the 1948 war and how the Zionists were able to capture more control. Sheikh, are you there?
Mashallah, can you guys hear me? I hope, can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, alhamdulillah, this is wonderful, Brother Youssef. Everybody here I've been putting little ticker things here so that people could follow, and they are like, wow, wow. And what I'm reading right now, some of the brothers are saying Iran.
Well, to their defense, it's not the same regime. This Iran was appointed, the family that rules Jordan was given, I'm sorry, that was Iraq, but you had those type of people, those like him, those puppet type of regimes were promoted over there. So it's not the same Iran, but yeah, it's kind of interesting when you go back 60 years and you see, how the world has changed. And some things have remained the same, obviously. The United States, obviously. No different now than it was then. In fact, worse, now if that's even possible.
And another brother is saying, and all of this, they was made a state within 1 year. He said, this is amazing. In 1947, they adopted this ad hoc committee. And then a year later, he said, they don't even work that way. Governments don't work that fast today.
No, and as I was pointing out, and I've kind of make a theme of this presentation, is that they knew all along. They give you foreshadowing. They call their shots. They're telling you what they're going to do before they do it. Ben Gurion saying, we want it all. It's a whole. He's saying right there in front of all these delegations that this is their plan. And we see immediately after that, they start poking the bear, as I said, trying to get that reaction. And then once they get it, they launch what they've already been trained for, already had planned. It's problem, reaction, solution. They create the problem, then there's the reaction, then they have the solution. Take more land, we've got to fight terrorism.
Okay, here's
all orchestrated way, way ahead of time.
Here's a question, and maybe Jamali might want to answer this. One of the brothers is typing, so is this when the Palestinian Liberation Army was created with Yasser Arafat?
Oh, we'll get to that definitely. Moving on. The Sheikh wants to talk on that.
No, actually, yes, sir. Yes, the first organization was the PLO, was Yasser Arafat. He started, and the moment he arrived to Lebanon, everything changed. And then after that, many organizations, unfortunately, exist after that. The Palestinian organization, one of them actually called communist, called Jabhat Sharia. Jabhat Sharia, the chief of that is George Habas. He's a Christian, and but now only in more exists two organizations, PLO, and that can work with the Israeli government, and another two in Gaza is the one Hamas and also Jihad. But after that used to be PLO only.
Yeah, that's what his next question is. The PLO, it was not what the Hamas is today, right?
Absolutely, completely different. In fact, a few years ago, they killed each other.
Yeah.
They killed each other a few years ago because of the corruption.
Okay, another person types, so this is good to hear that none of the Arabic countries were in favor of this. They just totally disregarded them to do this. This is bad. That's what another brother typed.
Well, yeah, they did what they always do. They talk. Oh, we're against it. But when it was time to put their money where their mouth is, they didn't do anything initially. Nothing at all. Later on, as we're going to see in the next part 4, there was mobilizations because the will of the people of those states wanted it, not the leaders.
I believe, brothers and sisters, who wait until Brother Yusuf finish with this series of very important lectures of the Brother Yusuf, and then we'll continue. If you have a question after that, Brother Yusuf will clear it for us.
Okay, here's another question. Let me make sure it's one that's worthy of me reading first. Okay, because I don't want no crazy comments. And y'all better not bring my uncle up in this either, okay? These crazy brothers. Anwar Sadat, don't mention his name. Okay. All right, here's a question. Do you know this right wing and even left wing supporter support Israel because of their hate of Islam? Would it be different if the other side was not Muslim? I don't understand his question. I'll put it on the screen. Maybe you can.
I think I kind of understand. That's what I'll read it. I think I got what he means, but if I read it in context, I'll probably get it better.
Can you see it on your phone?
Ma'am, I can't.
Oh, it says, do you think this right wing and even left wing supporter support Israel because of their hate of Islam? Would it be different if the other side was not Muslim?
Well, there's actually a very good question. I'm someone very familiar with the conservative white American groups, the evangelicals. I grew up basically raised in a Christian household. I saw the conversations in church. And it's two parts. There are some people who are basically racist. I ain't going to lie about that, against Muslims in general. They view Islam as a non-white religion, as an enemy, as a conqueror. And there's some bit of that there. But most of it comes from these evangelical pastors and leaders. A lot of them we've seen over the years have been getting their funding from the Zionist movements and propping them up. But they talk about one of the particular verses in Genesis. They twist it where Abraham is talking about Abraham, the family of Abraham. Bless those who bless thee and curse those who curse thee, referring to Abraham's descendants. And these pastors twist this into being the state of Israel. That this is Abraham, but that's not what the verse says at all. So the churches in America are filled with rhetoric saying, Jesus, 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 this is Jerusalem for the Jews, for the Jews, for the Jews. And then the second part of that is that they believe that the temple must be restored and then Jesus is going to come back. So they want the Jews to come back to Zion. They want them to return to the homeland because it means Jesus is coming back. So you see very clever ways that Zionists have been able to manipulate Christians into donating millions and millions of dollars for a people who quite frankly despise them. I mean, there are so many videos online of Christians getting spat at by Jews on the streets. I mean, there's a lot of hatred from some of these Zionists toward the Christians, but yet they just have this undying support.
Wow.
Oh my God. Oh my God. That means we are white and we are ignorant. Exactly. Not never very ignorant. You don't know what's right or what's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, as I said, in a Christian household, and people were all like, "Well, you have to support Israel because of Jesus, because Jesus is coming back. Israel needs to be in the center of the world for Jesus to return, and then the second coming is going to come on." They've been able to manipulate that into getting untold amounts of donations and money, again, from a community that, if they knew how much despised they were by these people.
Okay, and here's another question. So right before all the British dipped his hands in and then left, the Arabs and Jews lived there and got along with no problems. Is that true?
Yeah, part one. Yeah, we covered that in part one. There was no reported disturbances. None. I mean, I'm sure there was. I mean, anytime you put two separate religions together, you're going to have some idiots on both sides. I mean, here and there, but collectively, no. We didn't see any problems between the Arab, because there's Christians there. And also, this is something that the Western media tries to blind everyone to as well. There are Christian Palestinians. There are Palestinian churches that were existing for almost 2,000 years. And they were existing until when the Zionists blew them up. No Muslims blew these churches up. Sheikh could talk about some of these particular ones.
I grew up in Gaza, and they destroyed the church. Two churches, actually. This church in more than 2,000 years, this church in Gaza, and they killed the priests and everyone in the church. And unfortunately, no one speaks about it. No one. Yeah.
Another person typed, so now it makes sense to me why there are a lot of Orthodox Jews who are angry at what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. She said, and now I see why they're all saying we lived in peace.
Yep.
That was and I see now that they are not the same as Zionists.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Sheikh.
Absolutely, brother and sister, is a very, very important point. There is a Jewish, true Jewish right now is fighting very much about Palestine. And those true Jewish, they does not believe a country called Israel. I met many rabbis, because my second language is Hebrew, by the way. When I speak with them, they are not believing in a country called Israel. We believe Israel is the prophet Yaqub, Jacob, alayhi salam. That exactly.
Okay, here's another.
Yeah, we always want to mention that we are not bashing all people. We're talking about a cartel.
Exactly.
Demonic individuals who have no religion in their heart at all. I mean, most people in Israel are atheists. The ones that the Sheikh is referring to, the religious Jews, as he said, they don't believe in Israel.
That's what
you
they
see
said.
them in the rallies, and we need to give them ultimate respect and brotherhood and treat them with kindness.
That's what they're saying. And here's a sister. She said, I heard, I don't know if this is true, but is this true, that even those Orthodox Jews are being persecuted over there too? Is that true?
The sister is correct. I've heard a couple of stories. I'm sure Sheikh knows some as well. I've seen them getting beaten, by the police for holding up signs in the street and videos, protesting against what the genocide that's going on. Because that's exactly what it is. It's attempted genocide.
Okay.
By the way, brothers and sisters, Sunnahfollowers, in Palestine, actually, we have three religions, actually four religions. The Muslims, the majority is the Muslims, then Christianity, and then Jewish, and Druze. Druze, actually, they claim they are Muslims, but not believe in Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, and now the Druze, Palestinian, actually, they are with the Israeli army. With the Israeli army.
Wow.
But the majority of Palestine is Muslims.
The Druze, I didn't know they still exist. Oh, subhanAllah.
Oh yeah, they are in army system later.
I didn't know that. So they're in the Israeli army, the Druze?
Yes, the Druze in the Israeli army, but they claim Palestinians. But the Druze actually in Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine only.
Right.
That's the Druze.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And now here in America, when they came here, they have an organization, actually they call it like a musalla, and they meet together. They believe actually in Salat not Salat al-Jum'ah, they call it Salat al-Monday, men and women together, the Druze,
Right.
men and women together, and they dark, and every male and female sleep to each other regardless who. And and plus they says we are Muslim.
Wow.
Yeah.
They say, yeah, those are actually the worst people in Palestine. Those people,
The Druze.
more than anybody else.
I didn't know
Why?
that they still existed.
Now, who's in the prison? A lot of Palestinians in the prisons right now in occupied land. Who's in charge with the prisons? Druze.
The Druze, man, ain't that something?
Why? Because their language Arabic, Palestinian Arabic. They speak Arabic like us.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, here's another question. Let me put it up here so I can read it. Also, did this Zionist state change name of some of the city of Palestine, like Tel Aviv? It must not exist before the creation of Israel.
Yes, you call it Tel Aviv, Tel الهوى. المجد العسقلاني ابن حجر العسقلاني رحمه الله. بعدين جدود رافت امين استغفر الله الشيخ الشافعي الامام الشافعي المجد is now because Ashkelon they changed the name according to their desire.
Wow.
Actually, my city we are closer to Jerusalem because Al Fallujah, my city, get Kuriyat Arba. Now she changed the name also.
Wow.
Yeah. And I visit my house actually in occupied land in Fallujah. Fallujah was called Kuriyat Arba. I entered, when I entered the house, they told me, yeah, you can look, but it's not your house anymore.
Yeah, I heard.
And it belonged to my grandfather and my father.
Wow.
Yeah. And brother Yusuf, Jazakallah khair, what you're doing right now, an excellent job. And please continue. The most important thing, brothers and sisters, is Sunnahfollowers. Please and please and please share it for the people understand the truth about what's going on in don't forget, not because brother Yusuf speak, he's American, not because he's Muslim. He speaks as a American, but he knows the truth. If he knows the truth, then we have to spread the truth to understand the truth and to speak about the truth. It's very, very important. Please share it as soon as possible. Do not keep it to yourself.
Yeah, share the short. And by the way, guys, when I make the shorts, y'all see I make them a certain way where you can get the geist of what's going on, of what he's saying. I make them short and right to the point where you can see this happen. That's why he's getting all those hits, because people are like, wow, I didn't know that. Yeah, so share the shorts.
Oh, sorry. As you were saying?
Yeah, I was saying share your shorts. Share his shorts with everybody on your Facebook and YouTube stations.
And alhamdulillah, we have someone in Sunnahfollowers speaking about this. First time, Brother Yusuf speaking about this. Alhamdulillah, you guys speak a little bit, but honestly, he knew a lot more than I do. Maybe one I know compared to his knowledge, 1% I know.
I wouldn't say that. I mean,
I'm saying the truth, brother. Yes,
from
you know more
historical
than
perspective, but you have experience.
Yes, I understand, but you need to research. Me as a Palestinian, grew up in Gaza. I grew up in Gaza, and this, yes, my family there, yes, but you speaking for both sides here, and Christian side, Jewish side, and Palestinian side.
Yeah.
Me only Palestinian side. So that's why a lot better than me, brother. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you.
Alhamdulillah.
I want to add one more factoid before we close. Even the flag, the infamous, as we refer to it, the Star of David, you can go search the Old Testament, you can search anything doing with Judaism. That symbol never appeared. This is a pagan symbol that used to be outside the Rothschild goldsmith shop in Frankfurt, Germany. Wow. As we talked about in part one, when the Balfour Declaration was addressed to Lord Rothschild. The Rothschild family, Israel is their enterprise. It is their business. Their symbol is on the flag. but they call it the Star of David, but yet we can find nothing in history relating that star to anything dealing with Judaism or the Old Testament, the Tanakh, the Torah, whatever we want to call it.
No, brother, hold on, with all my respect, it is actually in Africa with the time of Pharaoh, with the old Egyptian language. I forgot what it's called.
We're talking about hieroglyphs.
Yeah, this symbol in the time of Pharaoh.
Well, it's an ancient pagan symbol, as I was saying, has nothing to do with David or the Bible.
Yes,
Right,
exactly,
right.
exactly.
And the Rothschilds had it on their goldsmith shop, and it's mystery school stuff. I can't say I know it or wouldn't be a mystery school, but we've seen, as he pointed out, it's been in Egypt, in Babylon. We've seen it as well, much like the swastika symbol of Nazi Germany has been a symbol used around the world for a variety of mystery schools and secret societies, but it's not biblical. It has nothing to do with King David or his empire or the Jewish people.
Subhanallah.
It's the Maghrib time now, guys. 20 minutes. First time I did it Maghrib. But brothers, it's very, very important. Next week, بإذن تعالى, Friday night, 6 o'clock, bring, very important to bring your kids watch that. Why? Because all your kids go to public school, the majority go public school. And even Islamic school, by the way, even Islamic school, we don't speak about this.
Right.
Legally.
Right.
So it's very important, Sunnahfollowers, in Friday night, 6 o'clock in Eastern time, bring your kids to listen to Brother Yusuf. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. By the way, I am the one begging him to speak about this. When he was in my office to speak together, I was, please, Brother Yusuf, please share this Sunnahfollowers. And he hesitated. But alhamdulillah, we love each other. He accepted that. Jazakallah khair, Brother Yusuf.
Yeah, the brothers here, thank you. The brothers here are thanking both of you, especially Brother Yusuf. And I don't think we have any other comments. So if there's no other comments, unless we got any from you, Zoom, well, they probably don't.
No,
I do.
Okay.
It's the Maghrib time now. I will leave now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, inshallah.
I was just gonna say, alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair for both of you bringing this out. And during this time, I was sitting here and I was wondering to myself, how do we get this information out to the rest of the people? Because this is important. This will make a big difference. Much of what's going on, I can see that before our lack of knowledge, even us as Muslims who think that we've got it together, we know it.
Alhamdulillah.
But there's so much we don't know.
Yes,
and our children should know. This is alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair.
This information for all the kids is readily available. The beautiful thing about the internet, it's been used for some nasty things, obviously, we all know, but there's so much. I mean, I got most of my information, a lot of research, encyclopedias, eyewitness accounts, news reportings. I mean, even Wikipedia has some good information, on it. United Nations website has good information on it. So lots of information out there. I just like to put it in a video format because I like to read, I like to dig, so it can help people, who may not have the time, who just want to spend an hour here and there to learn as much as they possibly can. And I thank you for your kind words and your support.
Alhamdulillah. We're going to inshallah make dua together. اللهم يا رب السماوات والأرض يا الله يا حي قيوم انصر المستضعفين في كل مكان. نسأل الله all of us to pray inside the Masjid al-Aqsa جماعة together يا رب العالمين. اللهم free المسجد الأقصى. اللهم احفظ المسجد الأقصى وprotect المسجد الأقصى and all يا رب العالمين المربطين في سبيلك. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك محمد. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.